Welcome to Canvassing 101, Purpose and Tactics. Why must we talk about purpose and tactics? Some of you might be familiar with the TED Talk given by Simon Sinek, where he talks about the importance of putting why at the center of everything. It allows us to become inspired and motivated. With regard to canvassing, it will allow us to spend time on things that produce positive results. It will help us avoid things that don't produce those positive results, and it will encourage us to complete each step in the canvassing process, since you'll understand its importance. Why do we canvass? Well, to persuade voters before the primary, and actually maybe not for the general so much, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Also, to identify supporters for GOTV, Get Out the Vote, to mobilize supporters. I'm going to make the case that success in canvassing is 20% persuasion, 70% voter identification, and 10% mobilization. We'll come back to that. So this is based upon the 2017 Stanford Mega Study, where they looked at all the existing field experiments that talked about the effectiveness of persuasion when it comes to canvassing. And there were some areas where the existing research needed to be supplemented, and so they conducted some additional experiments. So the findings. Number one, this is kind of bad news. Canvassing does not persuade voters in general elections. What they found is that if you canvass well before an election, it can have a positive persuasive impact that you can measure shortly afterward. However, that impact disappears before election day. Once within a 2-month window before an election, canvassing has been found to have an insignificant persuasive impact as voters get set in their ways and choose candidates based upon party identification. The good news is that canvassing can persuade voters in contested primary. So while partisan identity determines how people typically vote in general elections, it doesn't help people decide when there are several candidates running within the same party for primary election. Matter of fact, research shows that canvassing can significantly increase support for primary candidates. They also found that canvassing can persuade voters on issues. In particular, one study that looked at pro-trans rights canvassing that was done in the Miami area. As a result of some longer conversations with people, they were able to be persuaded on issues. So let's talk about persuasion from the standpoint of knocking doors for Mike McCabe. Persuasion really starts at the street. You want to have friendly body language as you're walking down the street. You never know if someone's looking out through their front window and are watching you. It extends down the walkway. And by that, I mean not to walk on a person's lawn. At the door, it's usually best to go to the front door. And then once you're at the front door, to give about 2 to 3 feet of personal space between you and the door. And I don't recommend that you enter a closed porch to knock on an inner door. The first 3 seconds are critical. You want to have a smile on your face, have your arms uncrossed in a friendly sort of posture, ready for someone to answer the door. Then you want to introduce yourself. Good morning. My name is Dimitri, and I live in Wapaka too. I've been speaking with people in our community, asking what they think is important for our future. I'd like to know what you think is important. Then you have a few minutes of their attention, and you want to jump right into something that starts a dialogue. You want to ask questions, but you want those questions to guide people to reach their own conclusions with a little help from you. So for example, question 1, do you believe that the people you elect should do what's best for the people, or should they blindly do whatever their party wants? Question number 2, do you believe that the people you elect should serve all the people, or just those that make huge campaign contributions? Question number 3, what kind of campaign would you rather see? One powered by lots of people and small donations, or one that accepts big money from special interests and $20,000 personal checks? This leads us to question number 4. Do you know which of the gubernatorial candidates, number 1, shares your values on these issues, number 2, has worked on them for decades, number 3, has written a book about them, and number 4, built a movement around them? This gives them an opportunity to consider which of the candidates, and perhaps to admit that they might not know which of those candidates does all those things that they're excited about. That gives you an opportunity to tell them. And if they're open to hearing more about Mike's background or ask you questions, you might want to have some of these background items memorized. That Mike was raised on a dairy farm in rural Clark County, that he graduated from UW with a degree in journalism, that he worked as a legislative aide for 3 state representatives, that he worked as a legislative liaison for the Madison schools, that he developed and ran a civics education program for the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, that he started the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, a nonpartisan watchdog group which he directed for 15 years, and that he wrote a book, Blue Jeans in High Places, The Coming Makeover of American Politics. And if you have one of these books and you could bring it along to show people, that would be great. that he founded Blue Jean Nation, a grassroots group dedicated to getting regular people in the driver's seat of our government. To close the persuasion part of this conversation, you want to hand them a palm card and just tell them, here's some information that you can read to learn more. You'd want to point to the bottom of the palm card to the website and tell them that if they go to his website, you can learn more about Mike's background and find a nearby campaign event so that you can meet Mike. Plus, if you take a short survey, you can get his book as a free download. So that's the persuasion part of the conversation. But the conversation isn't over yet, because we need to go into the second part of why we canvass, which is to identify supporters for GOTV. GOTV, or Get Out the Vote, is where we work on trying to increase turnout. And so we must identify supporters and collect enough information about them to be able to turn them out to vote when the time comes. True or false? Are these people more likely to turn out? People who say that they will vote in the primary or general election. People who say they are strong McCabe supporters. Are they more likely to turn out for McCabe than, say, people who don't say that they're strong McCabe supporters? Supporters who connect with Mike on issues versus supporters that we have no idea what their issues are and have never really addressed those. Supporters who get campaign emails versus those who don't hear from us on a regular basis. Supporters with the Mike McCabe sign in their yard. Supporters who also volunteer in the campaign. Supporters who get a reminder to vote. Supporters who know where their polling station is. Supporters who have transportation. Supporters who are registered before Election Day. And supporters who cast an absentee ballot, which I guess by definition means that they have turned out. So all of these 11 items are things that we know will encourage people to turn out. So how do we find out this information so that we can utilize it to increase the odds of people turning out? Well, we need to ask them, will you vote in the primary or general? How likely are you to vote for Mike in the primary? How likely are you to vote for Mike in the general? Which issue is most important to you? That way we can follow up on those issues. Can we place a yard sign in your yard? Do you want to volunteer? If so, what number can we call or text you at? What is your email address? Do you know where to vote? And if they don't, it'd be nice if we could tell them right then and there. Do you need transportation? Are you registered? And will you cast an absentee ballot? These are all questions that we should be asking as we finish with the persuasion part of the conversation. So going back to the issues and following up on issues, how many issues can we reasonably follow up with? Well, that's a lot of issues, but if we were to group issues together, we would only need to create a few messaging pieces, like postcards or table flyers, even email blasts. Each of those then could cover a range of related sub-issues. This could keep our costs down so we could reach out to more voters and follow up with those supporters once we know what issue, group, or category interests them the most. So here are just some of really countless number of issues, but these are some of the issues that are on a survey on our website. And you can see that out of 697 responses as of May 29th, almost about a third of them said that they want big money out of politics, and fair elections, strong voter rights would be a second, and so on. This is interesting because these are issues that people who are attracted to Mike care about the most. I mean, they're attracted because they actually went to the website and took the time to fill out the survey. I think that you could also make a case these are the issues that perhaps attracted people to Mike in the first place. So here are those same issues, but grouped into 5 categories. The wording of some of these categories could be, endlessly argued, but the basic idea is that people care about things that deal with cleaning up government, they care about things that affect their rights, they care about equality or inequality, the environment, and healthcare. And just about every issue can fall within one of these categories. If you're at a training right now, you should have received an issue category sheet. Take a look at that and you'll see the sub-issues that fall underneath each of these. As we knock doors, we're going to want to ask which of these issues are most important to the voters so that we can follow up with the marketing piece on those issues that fall within that category. So the final purpose of canvassing is to mobilize more support. What do we mean by that? So we need support in the form of volunteers. And as you're speaking to people, one of those questions that you would ask is, would you like to volunteer? Well, it's nice to be prepared with a handful of items in case people respond and say, well, what kinds of things do you need volunteers for? So we need people to knock on every door in cities all across the state. That's going to take a lot of volunteers. To deliver yard signs, to walk in parades, to show up at campaign events wearing campaign t-shirts, to staff campaign tables at local events, to perform people-powered billboards, and to call, text, or Facebook message supporters on Election Day. These are all pretty standard, probably top 7 local areas where people could be volunteering. And the other part of mobilizing is to get a lot of yard signs out there. That's why I believe it's important that we knock on every single door and not skip over someone that we think is already a solid supporter of Mike, because we want to get those yard signs out there. Well, the research shows that yard signs can have a 1.7 point effect on an election. On average, there's a lot of variance, but the theory is that the yard signs build name recognition, and that makes a lot of sense. As you're driving around, how would you know about a candidate, especially when there's so many in the field on a contested primary, unless you saw that candidate's name a number of times. The other theory is that it shows the campaign viability, that this is a candidate that is attracting enough support that they can financially afford to purchase these yard signs and has enough supporters that they're able to distribute these. But I've got a couple other theories that I think weren't measured by the research and perhaps might be as important as these other theories. I believe that when you've persuaded someone as you're knocking their door, you want to lock in that persuasion. And if they'll agree to allow us to place a yard sign in their yard, I think that will help lock in that persuasion success. Knowing that the research has shown that early persuasion in some general primaries can wear off, we want to do whatever we can do to lock that in. And once they have that yard sign, it's pretty hard to imagine that they're going to flip and support a different candidate. And what's more is I think that it will increase the likelihood that that person will actually turn out and vote. They've had to move this yard sign around to mow their lawn and to weed and put it in and put it out for a few months leading up to the election. They've let all of their neighbors in their community know who they're solidly backing. They've defended their decision to friends and family. I'd have a hard time thinking that they would then just sit home and not go vote. So let's get into beyond the purpose and just talk a little bit about our strategy. We'll cover more of this in Canvassing 201, but you should know that we'll be canvassing using a mobile canvassing app called eCanvasser. It can be installed on any smartphone or tablet. The costs of using this application are based upon the number of people that are loaded into the application. So to control costs, we're going to be loading one ward at a time per city as canvassers are organized and ready. Once a ward is completed, then you'll need to notify your county organizer. We'll notify myself to export that ward out of eCanvasser, delete it, and then import the next ward in your city. And ward by ward, we'll work our way through the city. So our statewide canvassing strategy in terms of prioritizing wards, we want to load the wards that had the highest turnout for Bernie first, because we feel that there's going to be a strong correlation between people who voted for Bernie and people who would be inclined to support Mike, particularly because Mike's strong position on money in politics and Bernie's strong position in money in politics. What we're going to be looking at is actually the inverse of the percentage of people that voted for Bernie in a given ward. The inverse basically equals the number of doors you would have to knock before finding a Bernie support. The fewer the number of doors you need to knock to get to that Bernie supporter, the better, and the more likely that you're going to be able to persuade people to support Mike. Before a ward that has high Bernie turnout gets loaded into eCanvasser, local canvassers should work with their county organizer and regional organizers to identify not only the wards that have high Bernie turnout, but also make sure that it's a ward that's appropriate for canvassing. In Stevens Point, for example, the ward with the best Bernie turnout was a college campus, which isn't going to work out too well in the summertime as we're canvassing door to door. So that's good to know so we can import the next best ward. And that's Canvassing 101. That covers our strategy and our purpose. Again, I'd just like to reiterate that success is based upon, on average, 20% persuasion, 70% voter ID, 10% mobilization. That's going to vary in a contested primary. Persuasion has an impact. Therefore, I would say for the primary, really about 40% of our canvassing success is going to be based on persuasion. But a good chunk is just getting some of those questions asked so that we can follow up and turn out our supporters and mobilizing volunteers and yard signs. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out Canvassing 201 to cover the nuts and bolts of how to use